All right, hello everyone. Benjamin Lee here. We're just going to give folks a couple minutes to get logged on and then we'll get going. We've got a lot to cover today. All right, before we get into it, a couple of quick housekeeping items. So first off, I'm Benjamin Lee. I'm here with my very talented colleague and friend, Hannah Achtor. We also have our friend Tasha, our colleague, who is monitoring the Q&A. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and not the chat. And please wait. I'm going to show you the agenda. Please don't ask questions until we maybe get to the section that's about the sort of ED initiative or subject area that you have a question about. We're hoping that the presentation answers at least some of the questions people might be having. Hannah and I and Tasha all work for Ascendium Education. We're a philanthropy and student loan guarantor. We are presenting this as part of the Wisconsin Coalition on Student Debt, which is a nonprofit organization representing a range of concerned organizations and stakeholders who seek to increase clarity around the key issues of student debt, college affordability, and loan repayment. I want to let you know that this will be recorded, and you can also get the PDF of the slide deck straight out of the event. We'll be highlighting some of the questions in between sections, and we'll try to get to all the questions we can today. But know that if we can't, I'll be giving you a hotline number at the end of the presentation. You can call that number. It links to Ascendium employees who are student loan experts. They won't have access to your loans, but they can help walk you through things. With that said, let's get into it. So here's our agenda. If you're seeing Supreme Court debt relief decision on there and you're wondering what I'm going to talk about, that makes two of us. Hasn't come out yet. Looks like they're maybe even going to add a week or two to their calendar to get all these decisions out. Then we'll go through a couple other ED initiatives that are kind of swirling around and of interest to a lot of different borrowers. So when we set this up 2 months ago, I was hopeful that we'd have a Supreme Court debt relief decision by now. Obviously, we do not. So what can I tell you about it? I'm not going to predict anything, but we should get the decision in the next 2 weeks. And I want to, I don't want to dampen anyone's enthusiasm for reading legal opinions or hot takes on what SCOTUS did. But what really matters for student loan borrowers is going to be what the Department of Education does in response to that decision. And it's really, no one really knows what that's going to be at this point. They could have a plan B depending on how the court rules. Obviously, if the court upholds the debt relief, then they will probably be, running with the applications they already have and opening it up to new applications. But again, we don't really know. So I'm giving you that link in the third bullet. That is the Department of Education's page on studentaid.gov, which is their main website for all things student loans. Go to that page. That'll keep you up to date on what ED is saying based on the Supreme Court decision. Now, if you've already applied for debt relief, there's nothing more that you can really do at this point. You're just waiting to see what happens with the Supreme Court and the department. If you hope to apply, stay on top of that page and see if they open it back up for applications. That's all I've got to say about the Supreme Court decision, unfortunately. So nothing smart at this point. But the payment restart, I can tell you a little bit more about it, even though the department is still not doesn't have a lot of detail out there for borrowers. So we know that for direct and other federally held loans, which means Perkins and FFEL, or Family Federal Education Loans, which are held by the department, those have been in a payment pause and received all sorts of benefits during the public emergency around coronavirus. However, those loans, Perkins, FFEL, and private loans, if they're not held by the Department of Education, they have not been paused and they do not have the same pandemic benefits. So we are not talking about those loans when we're talking about the payment restart. Student loan interest, which has been on pause, resumes September 1st. we know that the department is saying payments are going to be due sometime starting in October, and that if your loan has been in default, again, a, a loan held by the Department of Education or a fellow guarantor, collections on those loans won't uh, continue. They won't pick back up until October 2024. So what can you do to get ready for this payment restart? Um, Most important by far is just know and understand your federal student loans, what kind of loans they are and who has them. You can do that by going to studentaid.gov, logging in or creating an account if you've never been there before. So some sort of troubling stats, especially, I know there's a lot of financial aid administrators on this call or on this webinar. 16 million borrowers have had their loan transferred during the course of the pandemic. That's a lot of borrowers who might not necessarily have their contact information up to date with their current servicer, might not even know who their current servicer is. You can find all that out at studentaid.gov. And 5.8 million borrowers have not selected a repayment plan. This is because a lot of borrowers came out of in school status and essentially would have entered repayment during the pandemic if not for the pause on payments. So again, they might not have any contact with their servicer, might have no idea what paying a student loan is like. That's a lot of borrowers who might have confusion and questions. Once you know who your student loan servicer is, make sure your contact info with them is up to date. I would check out the federal student aid, that's FSA's loan simulator, to see which payment plan works best for you. It's a pretty remarkable tool. You can plan out all sorts of things and change variables to see what you might pay and for how long. And then consider applying for an income-driven repayment plan. That's a repayment plan that's based on your family size and income. So about those income-driven repayment plans, there's a new one coming, and the take-home message here is that it's probably going to be the absolute best plan for almost every single borrower. Now, this plan isn't final yet, but we think that it should be final very, very soon. Some folks are saying it will be finalized before the payment pause ends. And so this tweaks a plan that already exists called Repay to make it even more borrower friendly. It's going to up the discretionary income threshold from 150 to 225, thus protecting more of a borrower's income from even being considered as part of what they need to sort of look at to make a payment. If you have only undergrad loans, it's going to be 5% of your discretionary income above that amount per month. For graduate loans, it is 10. If you have a blend of those two loans, it's a weighted average of the original principal. And this last bullet seems maybe insignificant, but it is definitely not. It's very, very borrower friendly. Interest not covered by that monthly payment is forgiven. So you essentially cannot have a negatively amortizing loan on this plan. Now, know that these provisions have only been released in a proposed rule form, so they are sort of subject to change. But signs point to the department sticking with almost all the things that you're going to see in these slides about this new repayment plan. If you're someone who's already on repay, such as myself, you're wondering, okay, what do I have to do? I'll get to that, but just a little sort of precursor. The way that the department is talking about this plan right now, if you are already on the current repay, you will not need to do anything to switch onto the more generous new version. It will just happen automatically, and that will be the repay plan going forward. There won't be two sort of separate repay plans. These new regulations, again, proposed and not quite finalized yet, make changes to all the IDR plans as well. One nice one here is that with a borrower signing on uh, to a sort of disclosure willingness to share, if a borrower goes 75 days delinquent, uh, the department and its servicers will just look at the borrower's tax info and automatically enroll them in an IDR plan with the lowest monthly payment. So hopefully a sort of safeguard for borrowers that could be heading towards default. Um, Something else very new and very, very borrower friendly is that certain deferment and forbearance periods now can count towards forgiveness on these income driven repayment plans. I've got a list out there of forbearances and deferments that can count. A lot of these sort of make sense, right? If you're don't have any income or are struggling with income, well, you probably qualify for a $0 IDR payment. So these deferments and forbearances kind of go in the same direction. There was also this concern that borrowers were signing up for deferments and forbearances without understanding sort of how their balance would balloon over time. This aims to sort of make that not as much of a problem for borrowers. And for those periods of deferment and forbearance which were not listed on that previous slide, and remember, you'll get a copy of this deck if you want it, so you don't have to memorize or write any of this down. Borrowers can essentially make up payments for times that they were in deferment or forbearance. Um, and that includes payments for as low as $0 a month, equal or greater to what they would have been paying under an IDR plan. This is pretty sort of crazy to think about. You could go, you know, supposedly you can go retroactive and go back to a period of deferment or forbearance you may have had once these regulations are final, and reach out to your servicer and say, hey, I want that time to count towards IDR forgiveness. Here's my payment or my income information for that period of time. How much do I owe you to cover it? And they will calculate it for you, and you can pay it, and all of a sudden you have more time towards IDR forgiveness, which is 20 to 25 years, depending on the plan. One more thing that should be of interest to current borrowers who already have picked IDR plans: these new regulations will sunset both the pay and the income contingent repayment plans once these regulations are final. The borrowers that are currently on those plans are allowed to stay on them. They just won't be open to new signups. And borrowers with consolidation loans that paid off Parent Plus loans will still have access to ICR going forward, because for those of you that either have Parent Plus loans or work with a lot of people that have Parent Plus loans, you know that that is the only way to get any sort of IDR plan when you have a Parent Plus loan. You have to consolidate it and then only pay it under ICR, which is the least generous of the IDR plans, but is still in many cases preferable to paying it under a non-income driven repayment plan. A couple other changes, and this first one is another big one, very, very borrower friendly. Consolidating your loans will no longer reset the IDR forgiveness count on the loans consolidated when you consolidate into the direct loan program. Becomes a weighted average of the loans consolidated. This is a pretty big deal. You could have a lot of qualifying payments on a FFEL loan. You could, uh, you know, consolidate into the direct loan program for a variety of reasons, and you will not lose those qualifying payments on that loan. They will be factored in as a weighted average. Also, a curious thing that they added, which I still don't fully understand how it's going to work, but borrowers in default can make payments under the IBR plan, and they would count only towards IBR forgiveness. This would include garnishments and tax offsets that would qualify if they meet or exceed monthly payments under a standard plan. Still not exactly sure how that's going to be implemented, but again, pretty borrower friendly and very new. All right, before we move on, I want to take a look at some of the questions that we've got.
Pretty sure I know the answer to the last one, but I left it for you, just to be on the safe side.
Thanks. Thank you, Hannah.
Yep,
So
no
if
problem.
someone has an extended payment plan, can they switch, consolidate to an IDR plan and not lose their payment history for purposes of PSLF? So you don't need to consolidate to switch plans for that one. You can just select that whatever IDR plan you want, either online on studentaid.gov or on the IDR form, and you shouldn't lose any payment history. So I hope that that answers that question. And then the only other question we received so far, Hannah, thank you for answering. Um, yes, so super good question, and one that I've been hearing lots of sort of scuttlebutt about, which is, do we have any idea when the new repay proposal may formally be adopted? When is it actually going to be implemented? When can we actually get into this new plan? I've now heard from two relatively reliable gossip sources that at least portions of the plan will be available to borrowers before payment restarts, which seems very ambitious for the department, but I've heard it two different places now. So that is what I'm hearing. That is not public anywhere. Um, so sort of just stay tuned on that. And remember, if you're currently on Repay or you sign up for the current version of Repay, it sounds like it'll just roll over and you will be part of this new Repay plan once they get it fully implemented. All right, one more question that came in before I flip to the next section. I'll just read it out loud here. Consolidated loans with Mohila submitted employment verification form. So this is a PSLF question. Um, and you had FEL loans before. What do I do to get them to count my old payment history? Okay, so that's a really good question, and we will get to some of that in the PSLF section. But just know that Mohila is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness or PSLF servicer, and that many of these initiatives that the department is doing are sort of happening behind the scenes automatically. And there's nothing you can really do as a borrower to know exactly when they're going to happen to you or to speed them up. So I think for a lot of folks that have consolidated um, and get over to Mohila, the initial payment count isn't going to take into account the PSLF waiver that expired or this new IDR and PSLF account adjustment, which Hannah will tell us all about. So I would definitely stay on top of it, but I would not fret if the count isn't where you want it to be right away. It sounds like the department is going to take till at least the end of the calendar year to do the IDR and PSLF account adjustment, but again, we will get into a little bit more of that. Um, and then it looks like we already got an answer on the slideshow material. So I think we're going to move on. So one thing to do for IDR, and I already mentioned this earlier for getting ready for the restart of payments, but check out that loan simulator on FSA's website. Again, really useful tool. They do a really good job with it. Easy to see what you qualify for and which plans sort of pay off faster, which plans give you the lowest monthly payment, um, things of that nature. And you can also apply for plans right there for most borrowers. All right, I think that's the end of my section. So Hannah, you're up.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm actually happy I got to cover this topic because in the last year, some of you may be familiar, I've given a lot of presentations on PSLF, and it's a topic I've sort of become passionate about. I'm of the opinion it's an excellent program that could help many student loan borrowers. In fact, it's estimated that today, 1 in 4 Americans work for an employer that qualifies for PSLF. And prior to PSLF, a lot of loan forgiveness programs we've seen were really specific and quite narrow on who they covered, where PSLF's been a game changer and it covers a lot of people. So we'll dive in. For those of you who are not familiar with this program, it may be helpful to review the definition. The PSLF program forgives the remaining balance on direct loans after 120 qualifying monthly payments have been made under a qualifying repayment plan while working full time for a qualifying employer. Um, so the definition seems fairly simple, but there's actually a lot going on that you wouldn't recognize. There's about 5 different components borrowers need to meet in order to qualify for forgiveness. And this strict criteria, those components that are happening in the definition, have led to high rejection rates since the program started. And I think that those high rejection rates. Um, Hold on, I just want to see. I see some chats coming in. I want to make sure I'm covering all the questions that are out there. Sorry, hold 1 second. Oh, I've got it. Never mind. Those high rejection rates have led to public scrutiny, and that's led the department to realize changes were needed. And that's where we saw the PSLF waiver come into play last year. And the waiver was just that. It waived a lot of the necessary components to allow for borrowers who may not have been aware of certain requirements to still apply. That waiver expired last fall, but the upcoming changes are working to make a lot of the pieces of the waiver permanent. Okay. First, they're redefining what is considered qualifying employment. The current definition says borrowers must meet their employer's definition of full time or work an average of 30 hours per week or more, whichever is greater. It also clarified that working multiple part time jobs for qualifying employers would count as long as the employer worked at least 30 hours per week amongst all their employers. And now we're seeing some more specifications added for scenarios the original definition didn't cover. You can see the second and third bullets really address borrowers who work at schools and institutions of higher education. And this is great because what we were seeing previously is teachers would fill out these applications and they would put that they were full time from September through June. And then Only the payments they made during September through June would count, and all the payments they made during the summer months would not count. This happened frequently enough that the department actually put an answer out on studentaid.gov to say, hey, teachers, make sure you're filling out the whole year when you fill out your applications. This way, all your payments count. But I think adding this to the definition is going to simplify things and make it easier for educators so they don't have to worry about making mistakes when they're going through that application process. And the last bullet on the screen is super borrower friendly, as they're saying the entire month will count as long as the borrower met the criteria at some point throughout that month. And so PSLF has also said that contract employment doesn't count. And this is because contractors typically aren't employed by the entity they're working for. However, hiring freezes have prevented some people from becoming officially employed at an entity that would normally qualify. And so they're going to open this up a little bit. Right now, I think this is limited to doctors in the states of California and Texas. And another change that's coming is where they're going to allow certain jobs to qualify, even when the employer does not. Historically, PSLF has not been about what you do as much as who you do it for. And this is meant for profit organizations in the past were totally excluded, no matter what the job the borrower was doing for that organization. In some cases, that job was a public service. And it actually prevented them from moving forward. They have this career, they're providing a public service, but it prevented them from moving forward with the application and actually qualifying. On the screen, we put early childcare as an example because that's the one the Department of Education has referenced. Um, I'm hopeful that we'll see other groups covered by this as well. One group that I bring up is pharmacists because I've worked a lot with pharmacists this last year. And while they were all doing the same job, it really came down to who they were working for. And some pharmacists would get public service loan forgiveness to go through, no problem. If they're working for hospitals, government agencies like the VA, other pharmacists working for profit organizations like, say, Walgreens, Walmart, were not able to get this to go through. So, just kind of an example of how this might work. I have nothing definite yet on which groups it's covering, um, but I'm optimistic this opens up for more people. Next are qualifying payments. And I think this is really a factor that led to the most rejections in the past for PSLF. And there are a lot of positive changes here too. Payments no longer need to be made on time. And I believe previously there was a 15-day window that they looked at for this. And if a borrower paid outside of that 15-day window, those payments wouldn't count. They're getting rid of that. Payments are payments. Lump sum payments will count. And this means borrowers don't have to send in one payment at a time and can instead combine them and pay ahead. However, they can't pay more than a year ahead because servicers don't know what the borrower's monthly payment will be the next year. And that's because of the requirement to be on an IDR plan where they renew their income information annually. Payments made on direct loans prior to consolidation will count. Benjamin covered this. In the past, consolidation meant borrowers had to start all over with their payment count. And that's not going to be the case for direct loan borrowers anymore, as they'll get a weighted average of the qualifying payments they made prior to the consolidation carried over to the new consolidated loan. Also, borrowers can sometimes get credit for a qualifying payment when they didn't actually pay anything. The COVID-19 payment suspension has worked this way. All the months spent in the suspension have counted as qualifying payments for PSLF, meaning many borrowers working towards this have about 40 months under their belt without actually having to pay. And now the department is going to do the same for some periods of deferment and forbearance. And specifically, I think Benjamin covered this earlier. They're opening this up to include the time spent in specific deferments and forbearances and the ones listed on the screen. For the others, they can get credit for the months spent in deferment or forbearance if they pay the same or greater than they would have under a qualifying repayment plan. And I think Benjamin mentioned this earlier. If they went under a deferment that didn't count, but they're able to prove that they would have qualified for a $0 payment under one of the income-driven repayment plans, they'll go back and make those months count as well. So all very friendly, all meant to advance people's payment totals. With all of that, probably move to what's not changing and then maybe take a break for questions. So what's not changing, and I should probably be clear about that, the eligible loans for PSLF are not changing. Only direct loans can do PSLF. There are other federal student loans like Perkins and FELP that would have to consolidate to become eligible. And private loans typically cannot consolidate into a direct student loan, so they're just not eligible. It also will take 10 years of qualifying employment and qualifying payments. And that's a long time. But the original intent behind this program was to recruit and retain top talent in the public sector. So they really want to see people make that 10-year commitment at a minimum. And I think this will break and see what questions are out there just to make sure everybody's getting a chance to get their questions answered. I know it looks like Tasha has been answering a lot of them.
Yeah, and
Okay.
we have one
Okay.
from Stephanie if you wanna answer that one.
Sure. I'm enrolled in PSLF for the last 8 years. I went back to school part time for 6 months in late 2019, early 2020, and was automatically enrolled in forbearance for those months, which don't count towards my PSLF total. Even though I was working for my qualifying employer while in school, should I attempt to get these months to count towards my PSLF total? And so, what Stephanie's asking, and this is a common scenario for borrowers who go back to school, they're automatically placed into an in school deferment. And sadly, time spent in in-school deferment does not count towards PSLF. So, going into that in-school deferment meant that the months spent in the payment pause were removed. She wasn't in a payment pause. She was in the in-school deferment instead, and those months while in school were not counting. And in some cases, you can actually get that in-school deferment removed. So you can call into your student loan servicer and ask that they remove you from the in-school deferment, and then that should help take care of that situation. Benjamin, do you have anything to add on that one?
Nope.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. And are there any others out there? Oh, I see a new one at the top.
Yeah, do you wanna answer the one from Heather?
Yeah, sure. Are only loans that have been consolidated with Mohila counting or qualifying for PSLF? Does a Parent Plus loan need to be consolidated to be eligible? So good questions. There's kind of two questions here. First, I'll address the Mohila one. You do not have to consolidate and go to Mohila to be eligible. What happens where Mohila is involved, they are the PSLF servicer that does all the processing. When you apply for public service loan forgiveness through the studentaid.gov PSLF help tool, you fill out the application. When the application is processed and approved, your student loan automatically transfers to Mohila. And it's Mohila's job to go back and determine what your payment count is. So as soon as you apply for public service loan forgiveness, they'll look at the dates you put on the application, when you were working for a qualifying employer, then they'll look at the payment history and your repayment status, and they'll match that up to advance your payment count. So you don't have to specifically do anything to make sure you get to Mohila. It'll just automatically happen after that application's processed. Now, the next question, does a Parent Plus loan need to be consolidated to be eligible? And kind of a weird answer. The answer ends up being yes, but only because of the requirement to be on an income driven repayment plan. So they haven't said Parent Plus loans can't do public service loan forgiveness. They can. But because to do public service loan forgiveness, you need to be on an income driven repayment plan, it gets tricky because Parent Plus loans cannot do most of the income driven repayment plans. So what they need to do if you're a Parent Plus loan borrower, you need to consolidate. And then when you consolidate, you can be eligible for the ICR plan. That's income contingent repayment. It's one of the IDR plans, but specifically has to be that one. That is the only IDR plan that will take a consolidated loan that had underlying Parent Plus loans. So in order to get PSL right, if you're a Parent Plus borrower, you need to consolidate and then you need to select the income contingent repayment plan in addition to filling out the PSLF application, and you should be set. Anything to add on that one, Benjamin? I feel like that's one of the more complicated questions. I think he's answering some
Sorry,
of the others. No
searching for the
problems.
unmute. I don't want people to hear me typing, other answers. No, nothing to add on that one. You nailed it, and I think that also should answer Monica's
Monica's
question.
question. Yep. So
Yes.
Monica, if it doesn't, just put your question back in the chat in the Q&A. But for now, I think that covers you. And I saw another one come in, and maybe we'll make this the last one before we move to the next section. Um, So COVID hit right before I was supposed to start my first student loan payment. I've worked at qualifying agencies all throughout COVID. Would all this time count or not for PSLF? And good news, it does. So the payment suspension that has been put in place as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic uh, does count as qualifying payments for PSLF. So for borrowers who've been under that payment suspension, not making payments, but still working for a qualifying employer, you're in good shape because all those months in the payment suspension do count. You just have to make sure you submit that PSLF application.
And then there's just one I wanna answer real quick, Hannah.
Sure.
Amanda asked a really good question, that we get pretty much for any presentation nowadays, which is, are these new rules gonna be retroactive? And generally, the answer is yes, when it comes to like PSLF and IDR, um, because forgiveness is sort of backwards looking, they are essentially retroactive. So if you were denied PSLF previously because of one of the things that is changing in these new regulations, it might be time to apply again and see if that has changed. Similar for IDR, things that did not count towards IDR forgiveness in the past will now count towards IDR forgiveness in the future. So in a way, they are retroactive, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question, Amanda.
Okay, I think we've got a lot of the questions covered. Let's talk about the things to do that maybe we haven't covered yet to get PSLF to work for you. So for borrowers to pursue this, they need to go to the PSLF help tool at studentaid.gov. And I did reference that a little bit ago, but just to make sure you have it, um, studentaid.gov has everything PSLF related. And one clarification I want to make, because I think a lot of people get confused about this, is it's recommended that you apply every year. Do this annually. The first year you start working for a qualifying employer, apply then. It is okay if you're just figuring it out now and you're 3 years in, but some people thought they needed to wait until they got all 10 years of employment, behind them. And that can be tricky because it's hard to prove 10 years of employment retroactively. Applying each year helps a person know they're on track. Every time you submit an application, they will advance your payment count so you can see how that's moving forward. So I just want to clear up, don't wait until year 10. Apply as soon as you start working for one of those qualifying employers. And when you do apply, you're going to need your EIN, or your employer's EIN. And that's the employer identification number for tax purposes. This can be found on the W 2, or you can simply ask your employer for it. They're going to have it. Once you have that EIN, you can take it to the PSLF help tool, enter it in there, and that's where you can verify that your employer qualifies. At the PSLF help tool, you can also go through the application process there, certify your employment there. Basically, everything can be done there. When the application is complete, it will get forwarded to the student loan servicer for processing, and that's MOHELA, like we mentioned. When the application is processed and approved, the borrower will see their student loans get transferred to MOHELA if they were not at MOHELA already. So, like I mentioned before with the question we had, you don't have to worry about getting to MOHELA. Filling out the PSLF application and having it processed will get you over to MOHELA. Are there any other last things before we move on to the account adjustments? I think that we can just move and, of course, back up for questions after we get there. So, those last changes I covered are meant to be uh, permanent. These next ones are temporary, and so we're going to go over them so borrowers can take advantage while they can. And it's hard to overstate how generous this is. These are one-time account adjustments they're going to be doing to give borrowers credit towards the required 120 payments and the required PSLF payments, as well as their IDR payments. So I should say the 120 is for PSLF. The IDR payments could be longer depending on if you're in a 20-year IDR plan or a 25-year IDR plan. But these adjustments are meant to give borrowers credit towards the plan they're working towards. The first one means the first bullet means you're just going to give borrowers credit for all time spent in a repayment status, regardless of whether or not they actually made payments during that status. They're likely doing this for a variety of reasons. One being the lack of awareness borrowers had regarding the IDR and PSLF programs. Some borrowers didn't enroll in an IDR plan until they're already a ways into their repayment term. So maybe they've been paying for 5 years and then switched to IDR. That meant they had to start all over at the get go from when they switched to IDR. This is going to change that. For PSLF, like we previously mentioned, many borrowers didn't know they had to be on specific repayment plans. So this helps remedy any errors caused by them being on the wrong repayment plan. And I think there have been some past discrepancies in the reporting of payments. So using the repayment status instead of the actual payments keeps any of those discrepancies from hurting borrowers. The next adjustment involves the use of forbearances. The department has said that what they called past forbearance steering by the servicers was detrimental to borrowers' payment progress, and the department's wanting to rectify this. So the belief was that servicers placed borrowers in forbearances when they could have helped them explore IDR and enroll them in those repayment plans sooner. Therefore, forbearances lasting 12 months or more and a total usage of at least 36 months of forbearance time will count as qualifying payments for IDR and PSLF as part of these adjustments. Any time spent in an economic hardship deferment or military deferment will also count. And all deferments used prior to 2013, with the possible exception of the in school deferment, will also count towards IDR and PSLF payment counts. And that last one's because they didn't have a great tracking system prior to 2013. And that's why they couldn't see what types of deferments borrowers were in. So they're going to err on the side of the borrower to make sure they're not missing any of the qualifying deferments. And they're just going to do a sweep of all the deferments prior to 2013. And the last bullet is huge because in the past, consolidation has meant starting all over. And they're going to look at loans already in consolidation and count time spent in repayment on the older loans towards the payment requirement. So I think that answers somebody's question earlier in the Q&A. And all of this just means borrowers are going to get closer to their forgiveness goals, and some borrowers are going to meet the goal and see immediate forgiveness. So things to do. Um, you may be asking, what do they need to do to make sure they're included in these adjustments? For most borrowers, the answer is actually nothing. These adjustments are going to happen automatically. And for borrowers in the Fell or Perkins loan program, they need to consolidate by the end of this year to make sure they're included, since these changes will only impact direct loans. So most borrowers don't have to do anything. Fell and Perkins loans borrowers do need to consolidate by the end of this year. And I'll stop there to see what other questions we have. Anything you want to highlight, Benjamin?
Yeah, there's a really good one from Heather, which I'm
Okay,
just going to read out loud quick. And then you can answer it or we can answer it together. My
sure.
mom has a Parent Plus loan for my sister. We are going to apply for PSLF right before Biden announced the loan forgiveness plan. So we did not apply because at the time they said a consolidated loan would not qualify for forgiveness. Should we continue with the application at this time? Super good question. The department kind of acts like all these different initiatives are independent, sort of separate things, but they all do kind of interact with each other to some extent. And this is absolutely true, Heather, with your case. So I think it's a good thing that you waited. Hannah, do you want to answer this one?
So it sounds like, is this the case of like a Fell loan?
That's that's what I was reading it as, at least.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I just wanted to make sure I understood kind of how we were looking at it. So yeah, first off, normally they're different things, and I would say, because we don't know how that student loan debt relief is going to go, you could pursue them both. But in this situation, I think it is a Fell loan, and what the department came out with, they basically said for Fell loans, they're excluded from the student loan debt relief, and they also, there was a period of time where they were allowing to consolidate to become eligible, but I think as a result of the litigation happening, they came back and said FEL loans cannot be considered even if they consolidate. They're going to look at other paths to perhaps consider FEL loans later, but a consolidation could eliminate them from being able to do the federal debt relief. So I think that's just on hold right now as we're waiting for the litigation to get resolved. Is that how you're taking
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I would wait if this is a Fell loan, I would just wait to see how the Supreme Court rules and how the Department of Education responds to that ruling, and then if she does not qualify, for debt relief, either because debt relief doesn't happen or, her loan doesn't qualify, then I would, consolidate, going after PSLF. If this is not a Fell loan, and it's a direct loan, then all of this is moot, and you should actually qualify for both.
Yeah. So that is a really good question. It's kind of complicated. And again, for FEL loan borrowers, it might just because a lot of these, the account adjustments are happening. They say to consolidate by the end of this year. We're supposed to have that Supreme Court decision in the next couple of weeks. So it doesn't hurt to wait, see how it goes. If it gets shot down, then there's no harm to you consolidating at all because you could just consolidate and then pursue uh, the public service loan forgiveness.
And I
So yeah,
do wanna
direct loan borrowers are good for both.
Yep. And I do want to clarify one very strange thing, just so that everyone is on the same page. For FEL loans that are held by the department, you qualify for debt relief. And for FEL loans that are in default with a guarantee agency, you would qualify for debt relief. However, FEL loans in good standing with a commercial lender would not qualify. And if you consolidated, they would not qualify, at least as currently constructed. So very confusing for the FEL borrowers out there.
And I'm seeing a couple follow-up questions come in. Heather clarified, but first, before I go back to Heather, somebody else came back. How do you know if it's a FEL loan? So studentaid.gov, you can log in there and it will give you all of your loan data. And that's going to be how you can determine if your loan's a FEL loan, if it's a direct loan. And if you've never if it's going to ask you for your FSA ID. If you don't know your FSA ID, you can create an account right at studentaid.gov and get all your loan data there. If you do know your FSA ID, it's just a matter of logging in. But that's how you'd find out it's a FFEL loan. And then Heather clarified it's not a FFEL loan, just a normal direct parent plus loan. And if that's the case, Heather, you're good to consolidate. And then you can select the ICR plan, like I mentioned, because that'll be the only one, the only income driven repayment plan that Parent Plus borrowers can do after consolidation. And are there other ones out there that we haven't answered or we want to answer for the rest of the group?
No, I think we got them all.
Okay. Well, good. We'll move forward talking about Fresh Start. Um, so we're switching gears because Fresh Start's really only for defaulted loans. And normally, when a student loan enters default, and I say normally because this isn't exactly what's going on right now, borrowers face a bunch of potential consequences, such as wage garnishment, tax offset, collection fees, and the inability to get financial aid if returning to school. Right now, those consequences are on hold, and they're going to continue to be on hold for 1 year after the payment pause comes to an end. So this isn't ending this fall, probably next fall. Student loans are still a lot more friendly than other debts when it comes to getting out of default. And in the past, rehabilitation has been the more common option. It just takes 9 months to do. So Fresh Start is temporarily going to change this, and it's going to be easy to get out of default and not take at least 9 months. So this is another one of those one-time temporary programs being offered as a result of the pandemic. Borrowers can simply get out of default by requesting to get out of default. They need to work with the collection agency holding their loan and follow any steps recommended, but it can be quite a quick process for getting the loan returned to good standing. They just have to opt in. Most defaulted borrowers are held by the default resolution group, and we have their contact information here on this slide. Defaulted FFEL loans may still be held by a guarantor, and if borrowers are unsure who holds their defaulted loan, just like I mentioned earlier, you can track it down by going to studentaid.gov and logging in or creating an account. And from there, if you have a defaulted FFEL loan, you'll find where it's at. But most defaulted loans are at this default resolution group. Once a borrower opts in, their loan will be transferred to one of the student loan servicers and it will return to a repayment status when the payment pause comes to an end this fall. The default will be removed from their credit report and they'll once again have access to program options like IDR and PSLF, as well as being able to gain financial aid again if returning to school. So this one's a pretty nice perk for defaulted borrowers. And again, you may be asking, what do borrowers need to do? Um, they just need to contact whatever agency is holding their loan and request a fresh start. So again, on this slide, we put that contact information for the default resolution group since they hold the majority of the defaulted student loans.
And one last thing I
Any
want to highlight from this slide too, I know there's some financial aid administrators on this call, and we appreciate all the good work that you do. Borrowers can also just come into your office and say, I want to take out more aid, and you can actually get them into Fresh Start that way. And so hopefully your school has gotten guidance from the department and you're following it on how to work with borrowers who are interested in Fresh Start.
Thanks. I don't think I saw anything new get added to the Q&A since we took our last break. So I think it might be good just to kind of do a recap of the important dates that people need to keep in mind. Um, okay, so important dates we have the new PSLF regulations. When are they being implemented? Right now we have ongoing. We know they're working on this. I don't think we have exact dates for anything. It's just they're trying to get them implemented as quickly as they can.
Yeah, and for that one, they already have some of the new language like on the PSLF form. And so I
Okay.
think that they're pretty far along. Again, if you've been denied PSLF or PSLF counts, qualifying payments because of something that has now been changed by that final regulation that we talked about earlier, it's definitely time to reapply and see if your count changes.
And for the next one, the department has been very clear interest rates start again on September 1st. So borrowers are just going to return back to their normal interest rates. For most borrowers, their interest rates will be what they had before the pandemic began. And for borrowers with variable interest rates, that's only really going to apply to borrowers who have older loans they took out before July of 2006. They're going to return to the interest rate that was set for this year, which I think for most of those loans is going to be a little over 7%. But again, that's just for older loans. All the other borrowers will return to the interest rate they had prior to the pandemic. Um, and then for the new IDR plan, the goal is to have the new IDR plan Benjamin covered earlier, available when student loans go back into repayment. He said even before that payment pause comes to an end, um, that's the scuttlebutt. It's a goal. We can't say for sure that's when it's going to happen. However, we know they're targeting this fall. Payments will become due again starting in October. And the deadline for Fell and Perkins borrowers who want to take advantage of the IDR and PSLF account adjustments to consolidate is the end of this year. And for defaulted borrowers, they need to enroll in Fresh Start before October of next year to prevent any of the consequences I previously mentioned from taking place. So anything we want to add there? No? Otherwise, I think we just have a great list of resources on this slide that Benjamin included um, to help you kind of follow up. The first one is to the Wisconsin Coalition on Student Debt's website, which is the entity offering today's webinar. They also helped set up the Wisconsin Student Loan Help Hotline, which is the number listed. This is a confidential, free resource for expert student loan help at no cost to student loan borrowers. All you have to do is just call in and ask your question. The lines are open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30 Central Time. All of the other links on this slide point to a section of the FSA website, studentaid.gov, which I think we've referenced quite a bit. Um, this is where you're going to find any updates to programs we mentioned going forward. All of the updates happen on that website, and it really is a one-stop shop for all student loan repayment needs. So you can find most of your answers there. However, you're welcome to call into the helpline. We will help you find your answers. So before we conclude, I think now is just to make sure we answer all the last questions that are out there.
Yeah, this is the least number of questions I think I've seen on a webinar this size in a while. So hopefully that means that everyone knows what they need to do, or maybe we just, did a really good job. I guess that's possible too.
That's probably it. But we'll hang here for a few more moments just to make sure we get the last questions that pop up. If your question wasn't answered, put it out there so we can get it answered.
So we got one from Carrie. Do you anticipate any congressional pushback on the new IDR program that could lead to a halt in its implementation? Uh, no crystal ball, never say never. But I think part of the reason, again, just and then I will go ahead and look at my crystal ball. Part of the reason I think the department is probably trying to roll out the new IDR plan as fast as possible is to close that possibility if they can, right? If the plan is already up and running and people are signing up, it's maybe a little bit harder for litigation to slide, or sorry, saw someone post about slide, uh, to make them halt it. Um, so Jim, when you're saying please go back to the link slide, remember you can download this whole PDF right at the bottom of the page and it has all the links in there, but here it is. And appreciate the positive feedback from folks. Thank you. Any other questions? You still got us. So if you have any, we're happy to answer them. All right, I think if that's it, we're actually giving you guys some time back. Was able to go a little bit faster since we don't have that much information on
No
the
Supreme
Supreme Court
Court ruling.
decision, and the Department of Education hasn't told us a whole lot about their plan for exactly how repayment is going to start. So um, enjoy the rest of your day. And oh, we got a question came in. Someone has direct loans and completed a PSLF application through a third party. Her Mohila account shows she is on an extended repayment plan. She still needs to switch to IDR. So I would say generally yes. If PSLF is your end game, that means that you are going to try to have loans forgiven. That means you want to be paying sort of as little as possible during your period of repayment. And for most borrowers, IDR is how you're going to get there. Also, an extended repayment plan generally is not a qualifying plan under PSLF. It is temporarily, but I would definitely look at switching into IDR. All right, I think I'm going to stop sharing and we can shut it down. Everyone have a great rest of your week, all right?
Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.